Good evening, table of Los Fresnos. How are you doing this evening? It's Saturday evening. Hard to believe we are in the middle of our weekend and Saturday is over. What a fantastic day we had as far as weather is concerned. How did you spend your Saturday? I know we spent most of our Saturday, at least most of the afternoon, at the Los Fresnos Community Center, getting ready for our worship service tomorrow. And by the way, if you have no place to go, would you'd like to enjoy a live worship service? Tomorrow we're going to be doing that at the Los Fresnos Community Center, 10:30, and we'll have a Bible talk. We're going to have communion. We'll have some great conversation. 10:30 tomorrow. And if you can't make it, or you're still not ready to matriculate in church, then we're going to be live right here on Facebook. And we'll be on YouTube. So again, 10:30, join us, whether it's live or whether it's online. We'd love to see you and have you with us tomorrow. So Saturday is Mythbuster Day, and we got another one. This is actually, I shouldn't say brand new, but it's new in the context in which we're talking about, in terms of it popped up big time this week. A passage totally taken out of context. Now, this passage that we're looking at this week and looking at what the context is in the scriptures is not the result of COVID-19. Most of the ones we've looked at so far had something to do with COVID-19. This one has to do with the aftermath of George Floyd's death, and then the protests and the riots. There was even a cartoon that went viral this week that had something to do with this particular passage, or this particular parable that we're looking at. So this is where I'm going to start. Have you seen the cartoon on Twitter, Facebook, or social media? Have you seen the cartoon, All Sheep Matter? All sheep matter. That's where we're headed this evening. Jesus' parable of leaving the 99 sheep to go find the lost sheep being used by the supporters of, and again, we're so polarized, it's hard to frame this, but the supporters of Black Lives Matter have been using Jesus' parable of the 99 sheep as a response to those who respond to Black Lives Matter with All Lives Matter. Hence the cartoon, All Sheep Matter. And in the cartoon, Jesus is leaving the 99, and the 99 sheep are all holding signs, All Sheep Matter. And he's going to rescue the lost sheep. Now, we're not going to get into the whole Black Lives Matter versus All Lives Matter. That is for another day. We're not going there. Our particular thing this evening is looking at this parable of Jesus in which there are 99 sheep and then a lost sheep. I will say this, that it is a bit disconcerting when the All Lives Matter is used in a way to suggest that Black lives don't matter. And I think that's why Black Lives Matter, those that support that are using this parable as a response. That's all I'm going to say. Again, that whole discussion, Black Lives Matter versus All Lives Matter, that's for another day. The issue here is the parable. Is this what Jesus meant when he gave us the parable of the lost sheep? And the reason we're here right now is because I'm suggesting that's not the way Jesus gave the parable, was using the parable. It's not why Matthew and Luke are giving us the parable. And the use of the parable in our context in which we find ourselves this week with the Black Lives Matter, All Lives Matter discussion, it's unfortunate. So here we go. The parable does come from both Matthew and Luke. Matthew 18, Luke 15. We're actually going to consider tonight both texts because there are two contexts here. In both texts, Matthew is presenting the parable in one context, Luke presents it in another. There are indications that it's quite possible that Jesus actually gave the parable of the lost sheep on two different occasions, because it seems to be there's two different audiences here. But while the contexts are different, the point Jesus is making is the same to both audiences. The thoughts are the same. Jesus' point in Matthew 18 and the point he makes in Luke 15 are the same. So this is going to be a fly-through. I don't want to make this long. We're going to make this a fly-through. Let's look at Matthew 18. We're going to read the entire passages, though, by the way. So here's what Matthew 18 says. At that time, the disciples came to Jesus and said, "Who's the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" So remember that. That's the context. Who's the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? Then he called a child to him and had him stand among them. "I assure you," he said, "unless you're converted and become like children," remember that, again, context, "unless you're converted and become like children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven." So that's the context, that's the discussion. The disciples are asking, who's the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? And he says, unless you're converted and become like children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Now, he then gives three examples, or three analogies. "Therefore, whoever humbles himself like this child, this one is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven, and whoever welcomes one child like this in my name welcomes me. But whoever causes the downfall of one of these little ones who believe in me," remember that. Now here's the first analogy. "It would be better for him if a heavy millstone were hung around his neck and he were drowned in the depths of the sea. Woe to the world because of offenses. For offenses must come, but woe to that man by whom the offense comes. If your hand or foot," here we go, number 2. "If your hand or foot causes your downfall, cut it off, throw it away. It's better for you to enter life maimed or lame than to have 2 hands or 2 feet and be thrown into the eternal fire. And if your eye causes your downfall, gouge it out, throw it away. It's better for you to enter life with 1 eye than to have 2 eyes and be thrown into hellfire. See that you don't look down on one of these little ones." This conversation continues. "Because I tell you that in heaven, their angels continually view the face of my Father in heaven. For the Son of Man has come to save the lost. What do you think? If a man has 100 sheep, one of them goes astray, won't he leave the 99 on the hillside and go and search for the stray? And if he finds it, I assure you, he rejoices over that sheep more than over the 99 that did not go astray. In the same way, it's not the will of your Father in heaven that one of these little ones perishes." So the context here in Matthew 18 is a conversation between Jesus and his disciples. The subject matter of the discussion is the question of who's the greatest in the kingdom. And so Jesus puts a child in the midst, and we're going to have this discussion. The question is not about children and their equality. That's key here. That's not the context. The discussion is not about whether children are equal to adults. The context is belief and faith. What does it take to get into the kingdom? The question is in that very first statement. Unless you're converted, unless you receive the kingdom in faith, just like a little child, you're not going to be part of the kingdom. Christ's salvation is for everyone. The kingdom is for everyone, including children. Children who receive the kingdom in faith are examples for all of us. All of us are to be like those children who receive Jesus in faith. They're not to be looked down on. And the moment that we start looking down on anyone, including children, for faith in Jesus, and because of their faith in Jesus, is the moment that we're saying that that child doesn't deserve salvation. And we're also acting in unbelief, as if we don't have faith, as if we don't have the kingdom. So that's the first thing. The second passage is another conversation that Jesus has, and this time he's not talking with his disciples, he's talking with the Pharisees. He's talking with religious leaders, the Pharisees and the scribes, the religious leaders of that day. They were constantly causing problems for Jesus. And their problem that he is addressing is their unbelief. And it shows up because in their complaint, they are complaining about Jesus hanging out with sinners, tax collectors, and sinners. You see, the Pharisees don't believe Jesus. They're in unbelief. They do not believe that Jesus is the promised one of the Old Testament. So on the flip side, Luke is emphasizing that these religious leaders, throughout the story of Luke, these religious leaders did not accept Jesus for who he is. On the flip side, the outcasts, the marginalized, the sinners are believing Jesus for who he is. They do believe he's the promised one of the Old Testament. Jesus was always in their company, and as a result, they're putting their faith and their trust in Jesus. And that's the context of the conversation here in Luke 15. Here it is. All the tax collectors and sinners were approaching to listen to Jesus. The scribes and Pharisees were complaining, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." So he told them this parable. So there's your context. "What man among you has 100 sheep and loses one of them, does not leave the 99 in the open field and go after the lost one until he finds it? When he's found it, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders, and coming home, he calls his friends and neighbors together, saying to them, 'Rejoice with me, because I found my lost sheep.' I tell you, in the same way, there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous people who don't need repentance." So there's your story. Tax collectors and sinners listen to Jesus. They believe in Jesus. Pharisees and scribes, the religious leaders of that day, the religious establishment of that day, they don't. They're complaining about Jesus' company. And it's in that context that Jesus tells the story. So, all that to say, between Matthew and Luke, you got two conversations. You got the same story of the lost sheep, 99. Jesus leaves 99, go find the one. The point's the same in both parables, that Jesus' life, death, and resurrection, his ministry, are all aimed at saving lost sheep. That's the point of both contexts. That's the point of the parable, that his ministry, his life, his death, his resurrection, all aimed at saving lost sheep. Now, 4 things to say. We're going to make this quick, but we're going to say this as part of our myth busting this evening. The point of the parable in both instances is that Jesus is saving sinners. These lost sheep that he's going to find, they're going to hell. He has come to bring salvation to those who are going to hell. That's the lost sheep in both parables. Jesus is on mission to find those who do not know Jesus and make sure they hear the good news of Jesus, so that he will rescue them and save them and make them part of his kingdom. The parable is an expression of Christ's mission on earth. In fact, this parable is directly tied to the mission that was given at the beginning of Matthew. Jesus has come to save his people from their sins. He has come to rescue those sheep from their sins. In fact, Jesus says this in Matthew. He says this right in Matthew. That in the middle of the context in which he is stating this parable, he says that I've come to save the lost. The Son of Man has come to save the lost. The lost are those who are in sin. The lost are those who are going to hell. That's the context. The context is not Jesus has come to save he has not come to save the environment. Jesus has not come to make all things equal between all people groups. Now, are those the products of his salvation? Yes. But that's not his mission. His mission is to save his people from their sins. He has come to save those who are in sin. That's the lost in both contexts. That's the conversation. So, we can also say, secondly then, this is not neither passage, neither context, the parable itself, the 99 sheep, the lost sheep, all of that, these aren't social justice verses. It's not a social justice passage. It's not a social justice parable. None of the parables are, in fact. Even those parables that are emphasizing the disenfranchised and the marginalized, they're ultimately about the kingdom and salvation and who's in. Does salvation have implications for social justice? It does. But that's not the point. It's not the point of these passages or these parables. The reality is that the marginalized and those who are disenfranchised, they are more likely to embrace Jesus for who he is, embrace his salvation, believe in Jesus for the forgiveness of sins than those who aren't. And in this context, they are certainly more likely to embrace Jesus than the religious elite, than the religious establishment, than the pastors and teachers of the day. Third, the 99 are in danger. And I say that because if you were to look at Twitter this week, you would see that some making the statement that the 99 are not in danger. Again, complete misreading of what's happening in this passage. You know, again, if somebody says the 99 are not in danger, they're reading this through a social justice lens. And that's not the context for these parables. The second thing here in saying the 99 are not in danger misses the point of what's happening here, because you know what's happening here? When Jesus is talking about or talking to Pharisees and the religious establishment, he's saying, you're the 99. I'm here for the lost. So the Pharisees believe that they're in their self-righteousness, they believe they're a lock for the kingdom. And so Jesus is always saying, I'm not here for you, I'm here for the lost. You think you're already saved, so why am I'm not going to, this is not for you then. It's an indictment about their self-righteousness. I am leaving the 99, I'm going to find the lost sheep. And we get that, he explicitly says that in the Luke passage, Luke 15:7. At the very end, he says he's come to save the lost sheep. And he talks about the 99 who don't need repentance. Well, who doesn't need repentance? The Pharisees don't. They don't think they need repentance. Israel doesn't think they need repentance. They don't believe they need it. They are immersed in their own self-righteousness. This is another way of saying where Jesus, in another context, Jesus says, I didn't come for those who are well, I came for those who are sick. I didn't come for the 99, I came for the one. This is not a compliment for the 99. This is not a compliment. This is an indictment. An indictment on Israel, an indictment of the religious leaders. And fourth, to further this point, the 99 are just like the older brother in the parable of the prodigal son, which follows just moments later. So the 99 sheep, same thing as the older brother who didn't, who considered himself, he was self-righteous, considered himself the beneficiary of salvation, the one who deserved it. He doesn't believe the prodigal son deserves a celebration. He was lost. Jesus gives that parable in the prodigal son. The indictment is on the older brother, the Pharisees, the scribes, the religious leaders of the day. It's the same thing here in the parable of the lost sheep. It's an indictment of the 99. Those who are not embracing Jesus for who he is. So one final comment about this context. As we read this passage, as we read the parable of the 99 sheep and the lost sheep, what we are supposed to see is that all of us, regardless of whether we find ourselves on one side of the political spectrum or the other, the Black Lives Matter crowd versus the All Lives Matter crowd, regardless of where we land, we're all supposed to see ourselves as the lost sheep in need of Jesus. We're not supposed to see ourselves as the 99. Jesus is indicting that. The 99 are there because they're self-righteous. They think they're already in. They think they're already part of the kingdom. And Jesus says, my ministry is for the lost ones. Well, if that's his ministry, I want to be that. That's where I find myself. I'm in need of Jesus to come rescue me. We're all in need of Jesus equally. We all need Jesus to come and rescue us every day, all of the time. We always need repentance. We always need forgiveness. It's not just a one-time deal. That's what the Pharisees were thinking. That's what the 99 think. So one time, it's just one time in and I'm in. No, I need Jesus all of the time. I'm always in need of his rescue because I'm a sinner. I'm lost. I need Jesus. You know, if all of us decided to view ourselves as the lost sheep to whom Jesus is going, and always in need of Jesus, our lives would be, we'd have a lot more peace and harmony. Just saying. That is today's Mythbuster. That's today's Mythbuster. That's our conversation at the table for this evening. Join us tomorrow at the Los Fresnos Community Center. We'll be there at 10:30. Again, if you can't make it or you're not going to make it to church, then join us online. Join us right here on Facebook. Join us on YouTube. And until then, stay safe, stay healthy, stay at home as much as possible. Stay connected. Remember, all of us, lost sheep, loved by Jesus for the love of Los Fresnos. Have a great Saturday evening.